When 16-year-old Marcus Hamilton called his famous brother after the Spanish Grand Prix, Lewis expected to hear about school or friends. Instead, Marcus made a request that would shatter 14 years of buried secrets, expose a shocking cover-up that nearly destroyed Lewis's career, and lead to the most dangerous family reunion in Formula One history. What started as one simple wish would change everything Lewis thought he knew about racing, family, and the accident that had haunted him since 2010. Lewis Hamilton sat on his white leather couch in his Monaco apartment. The golden trophy from today's Spanish Grand Prix sat on his coffee table. It was heavy and shiny, but Lewis felt empty inside. The race had been hard. Max Verstappen had fought him at every turn. It was like Max knew exactly what Lewis would do before Lewis even did it. This happened a lot lately. Too much. Lewis picked up his phone to call his mom. Before he could dial, the phone rang. The screen showed Marcus, little brother. "Hey Marcus," Lewis said with a smile. Marcus always made him feel better. "Lewis." Marcus sounded excited but nervous. "I saw you win today on TV. You were amazing." "Thanks, bro. How's everything in Stevenage?" Lewis asked. Marcus was 16 and still lived in their old hometown with their mom. "Actually, that's why I'm calling." Marcus's voice got quiet. "Lewis, I need to tell you something important." Lewis sat up straight. Marcus never sounded this serious. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is mom okay?" "We're fine. But Lewis, I found something. In mom's attic. Old letters. Letters. Letters from someone who says he's my father. My real father." Lewis felt like someone punched him in the stomach. He knew Marcus wasn't talking about Anthony Hamilton, the man who raised them both. Anthony was a good dad to both boys. "Marcus, what do you mean? Anthony is your dad." "No, Lewis. These letters are from before Anthony married mom. From when I was really little. The man's name is David Sterling." Lewis dropped his trophy. It hit the marble floor with a loud crash. "Lewis, are you there?" Marcus asked. "Yeah, I'm here." Lewis's voice was shaky. "Marcus, what do these letters say?" "They say David was there when I was born, that he took care of me for 3 years, that he taught me to ride my first bike. But then he left when I was 3, and I don't remember him." Lewis closed his eyes. This was his worst nightmare coming true. "The letters say David still loves me," Marcus continued. "He says he watches your races every weekend. He says you remind him of me when I was little." "Lewis, I don't understand. How does he know about you?" Lewis's hands were shaking. He had kept this secret for so long. "Marcus, what exactly do you want?" "I have one simple wish, Lewis. Just one." Lewis expected Marcus to ask for money or race tickets. Maybe a new car for his 17th birthday. "What is it?" "I want to meet David Sterling. I want to ask him why he left. I want to know why he stopped being my dad." Lewis felt sick. "Marcus, you don't understand. The letters say he lives near Milton Keynes now. That's only 2 hours from here. Lewis, will you help me find him?" Lewis stared at his reflection in the TV screen. He looked scared and tired. "Marcus, there are things about David Sterling you don't know. Things I never told you." "Like what?" Lewis took a deep breath. How could he tell his little brother the truth? How could he explain that David Sterling wasn't just any man? "Marcus, David Sterling has a son who hates me more than anyone in the world." "What? Why would anyone hate you?" "Because 14 years ago, I was in a racing accident. David's son was the other driver. He got hurt really badly. He couldn't race anymore." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "So David left our family because of you." "David blamed me for destroying his son's dreams. He said I was reckless and dangerous. He said he couldn't be around our family anymore because every time he looked at you, he thought about me. But it was just an accident, right?" Lewis paused. "Yes, it was an accident. But David didn't see it that way. His son didn't see it that way either." "Lewis, what's David's son's name?" Lewis looked out his window at the Mediterranean Sea. In a few hours, the sun would set, and tomorrow would bring new problems. But right now, he had to tell Marcus a truth that would change everything. "His name is James Sterling. And Marcus, he works for Red Bull Racing now. He helps Max Verstappen beat me in every race." "You mean the man who was my father for 3 years? His son is helping your biggest rival." "It's worse than that," Lewis whispered. "James Sterling has spent the last 14 years studying every move I make. He knows how I think, how I race, how I get frustrated. And he uses all of that to help Red Bull destroy my career." Marcus was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Louis, I still want to meet David. Even more now. Marcus, no? It's too dangerous. Louis, what if I can change his mind? What if I can make him remember that he loved me once? Maybe he'll stop helping James hurt you. Louis felt a chill run down his spine. His little brother had no idea what he was asking for. 3 days later, Louis's private jet landed at London Heathrow Airport. He hadn't slept during the flight from Monaco. All he could think about was Marcus and those letters. Louis drove his black Mercedes through the familiar streets of Stevenage. Nothing had changed much since he was a kid. Same houses, same shops, same memories on every corner that he pulled into the driveway of his childhood home. The small brick house looked exactly the same as when he left from Monaco years ago. Marcus was waiting by the front door. Mom's visiting Aunt Sarah in Barbados for 2 weeks, Marcus said as Louis got out of the car. So it's just us. Louis hugged his little brother. Marcus had grown taller since Christmas. Soon he would be as tall as Louis. Are you sure you want to do this? Louis asked. Once we look at those letters, we can't go back. Marcus nodded. I've been thinking about David every day for 3 days. I need to know the truth. They walked into the house. It smelled like their mom's cooking and old furniture. Louis felt like a teenager again, but not in a good way. Marcus led him upstairs. To the attic. They climbed the narrow wooden ladder and turned on the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The attic was full of Christmas decorations, old clothes, and boxes of photos. In the far corner sat a dusty cardboard box that Louis had never seen before. There, Marcus pointed, behind where the Christmas stuff usually goes. Louis frowned. Marcus, Mom always keeps the Christmas decorations in the garage. Why are they up here? I don't know. They were just here when I came looking for old photos for your birthday. Marcus opened the box carefully. Inside were 23 letters, all addressed to Marcus Hamilton in neat handwriting. The return address said David Sterling, Milton Keynes. Louis's hands shook as he picked up the first letter. It was dated December 15th, 2007. Marcus would have been 3 years old. Read this one out loud, Marcus said, handing Louis a letter from 2009. Louis read slowly. Dear Marcus, I hope you had a good birthday. You're 5 now, old enough to ride a real bicycle. I remember teaching you to pedal in the park. You were so brave, even when you fell down. I know I can never make up for leaving, but I watch your brother race every weekend. He reminds me so much of you when you were little. Marcus looked confused. What does he mean? How does he know about? When I was little, Louis set the letter down. His worst fears were coming true. Marcus, I need to tell you something I should have told you years ago. What? David Sterling didn't just leave when you were born. He was there for your first 3 years. He lived with us. Marcus stared at Louis. That's impossible. I would remember. You were too young. But David was the one who taught you to walk. He bought you your first toy car. He read you bedtime stories every night. Louis picked up another letter and read. I saw Louis win in Hungary today. He drives just like you used to push your toy cars around the house. Fast and fearless. I'm proud of him, even though I know I have no right to be. Louis, if David loved me so much, why did he leave? Louis sat down on an old trunk. This was the hardest conversation of his life. Because of the accident, Marcus. After I crashed into James Sterling in 2010, David had to choose. Choose what? Between helping his real son recover from his injuries, or staying with the family of the driver who hurt him. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. So David picked James over me. David was angry and confused. James spent months in the hospital. He needed operations on his leg. He was depressed and angry. David thought the only way to help James was to cut all contact with our family. Louis found another letter, this one from 2012. Marcus, I drive past your school sometimes and wonder if you're happy. I wonder if you miss me or if you've forgotten me completely. James is doing better now, but he's still angry about the accident. He studies racing videos every day, trying to understand. What went wrong? I think he blames Louis for more than just the crash. What else does James blame you for? Marcus asked. Louis looked at his little brother. James blames me for taking away his future. But Marcus, there's something else. Something worse. What? After David left us, he told James everything he knew about our family. How I think, how I race, what makes me nervous. So James has been using that information to help other drivers beat me. For the past 4 years, He's been working for Red Bull Racing. He tells Max Verstappen exactly how to race against me. Marcus picked up the newest letter, dated just 6 months ago. Marcus, you're 16 now. Almost a man. I see Lewis struggling in races lately, and I wonder if it's because he carries guilt about what happened to James. I wonder if he carries guilt about me leaving you. I want to tell him it's not his fault, but James isn't ready to forgive yet. Lewis, Marcus said quietly, David wants to make peace. Maybe, but James doesn't, and David won't go against his son again. Marcus stood up and walked to the small attic window. Lewis, what if I talked to James? What if I could make him understand that the accident wasn't your fault? Lewis felt panic rising in his chest. Marcus, no. James Sterling has spent 14 years hating me. He's not going to listen to a 16-year-old. But what if he will? What if seeing me reminds him that David loved our family once? Lewis looked at all the letters scattered around the attic floor. 23 letters over 8 years. David had never stopped thinking about Marcus. Marcus, if we do this, if we contact David and James, everything will change. Our family, my career, everything. Marcus turned around. His eyes were full of determination. Lewis, everything already changed 3 days ago when I found these letters. The question is, are we going to hide from the truth, or are we going to face it? Lewis picked up the last letter, still unopened. The postmark was from 2 weeks ago. Should we read this one? He asked. Marcus nodded. Together, Lewis opened the envelope. Inside was a short note. Marcus, I know this is sudden, but I think it's time we met. James is finally ready to hear the truth about what really happened in 2010. There are things about that accident that Lewis doesn't know. Things that might change everything. If you want to see me, I'll be waiting. Love, David. Marcus and Lewis looked at each other in shock. What things don't you know about the accident? Marcus asked. Lewis stared at the letter. His hands were shaking again. I have no idea. The next morning, Lewis drove Marcus to the old go-kart track in Hertfordshire where everything had started. The track was quiet on a Tuesday morning. Only a few kids were practicing with their dads. Lewis parked near the fence where he used to watch other drivers when he was Marcus's age. The smell of rubber tires and gasoline brought back memories. This is where David first brought me, Lewis said. I was 8 years old. He wasn't my dad, but he came to watch me race anyway. Marcus sat on the old wooden bleachers. Tell me about the accident, Lewis. Tell me everything you remember. Lewis took a deep breath. For 14 years, he had tried not to think about that terrible day, but now he had to remember every detail. It was July 11th, 2010, the British Grand Prix weekend at Silverstone. I was driving for McLaren then. It was my home race, so everyone was watching. Lewis pointed to the racing line painted on the track. The accident didn't happen during the actual Grand Prix. It was on Friday during practice sessions. What's a practice session? Before the real race, drivers practice on the track. We test our cars and learn the best way to take each turn. On that Friday, I was testing a new setup for my McLaren. Lewis stood up and walked to the fence. In his mind, he could see Silverstone's famous track layout. James Sterling was also practicing that day. He was driving in Formula 2, which is one step below Formula 1. James was only 19, but everyone said he would make it to Formula 1 soon. Was he a good driver? He was amazing. Fast, smart, brave. Some people said he was better than me when I was 19. Lewis closed his eyes, remembering. The accident happened at turn 15, the fastest corner on the track. Cars go through there at about 180 kilometers per hour. Marcus tried to imagine cars going that fast. What went wrong? I was pushing my car to its limits, trying to find speed. For qualifying, James was on his practice lap, driving the normal racing line. Lewis's voice got quieter. I came into turn 15 too fast. Way too fast. When I saw James ahead of me, I tried to brake, but it was too late. Did you hit him hard? Lewis nodded. My car hit the back of his car at full speed. James's car spun off the track and hit the barrier. My car just had some front wing damage. Marcus asked the question Lewis had been dreading. Were you showing off? Were you trying to prove you were faster than him? Lewis sat back down on the bleachers. That's what everyone thinks. That's what I thought for years. But Marcus, I swear I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was just young and stupid. What happened to James? The ambulance took him to the hospital. He had broken ribs, a broken arm, and serious damage to his left leg. The doctors worked on him for hours. Lewis's voice broke. James spent 4 months in the hospital. He had 3 operations on his leg. When he finally got out, he couldn't feel his foot properly. He could walk, but he couldn't control a race car anymore. Marcus felt tears in his eyes. So his racing career was over? Completely over. James Sterling went from being a future Formula One star to being a young man who could barely walk without pain. And David blamed you. Lewis picked up a small stone and threw it at the fence. David came to see me in the McLaren garage the next day. He was so angry, I thought he might hit me. What did he say? He said I was reckless and selfish. He said I cared more about going fast than about other people's safety. He said I had stolen his son's future. Lewis remembered David's exact words. They still hurt after all these years. David told me he never wanted to see me again. He said, being around our family would just remind him of what I had done to James. But you were part of our family too, Marcus said. Didn't he care about hurting you? I don't think he was thinking clearly. His son was in the hospital. James was depressed and angry. David felt like he had to choose between helping James or staying with us. Marcus was quiet for a moment. So David left me to help James? Lewis nodded. David thought the only way to help James heal was to focus completely on him. That meant cutting all contact with the driver who caused the accident. But if it was really an accident, why couldn't David forgive you? Lewis threw another stone. Because James couldn't forgive me, and David couldn't disagree with his injured son. Where is James now? Lewis's face got dark. That's the worst part of this whole story. After James got out of the hospital, he became obsessed with proving that I crashed into him on purpose. On purpose? Why would you do that? I wouldn't. But James was young and hurt and angry. He needed someone to blame. So he convinced himself that I was jealous of his talent and wanted to stop him from reaching Formula One. Lewis stood up and started pacing. James spent 2 years studying video of the crash. He learned everything about racing and car technology. Then he got a job as a racing analyst. What's a racing analyst? Someone who studies drivers and finds their weaknesses. James became an expert on driver psychology and race strategy. Marcus was starting to understand, and Red Bull hired him to study you. Not officially, but for the past 4 years, James has been attending Red Bull strategy meetings. He watches video of my races and tells them exactly how to beat me. How does he know so much about you? Lewis looked at his brother. Because David told him everything. How I think, what makes me nervous, how I react under pressure. David spent 3 years watching me grow up. He knew me better than my own parents in some ways. So James uses that information against you. Every race weekend, James Sterling knows my driving style better than I do. He can predict what I'll do before I do it. That's why Max Verstappen always seems to be 1 step ahead of me. Marcus felt sick. So when David left our family, he gave James all the tools he needed to destroy your career. Lewis sat back down next to his brother. James has turned 14 years of pain into a weapon. And the worst part is, he thinks he's fighting for justice. Marcus asked quietly, Lewis, do you think James is right? Do you think you crashed into him on purpose? Lewis looked into his brother's eyes. Marcus, I've asked myself that question every day for 14 years, and I honestly don't know anymore. That evening, Lewis drove Marcus to the McLaren Technology Center in Woking. The huge glass building looked like a spaceship in the darkness. Security guards knew Lewis and waved them through the gates. Why are we here so late? Marcus asked as they walked through empty hallways. Because I want to show you something that will help you understand why this is so dangerous, Lewis said. He used his security card to open the door to the simulator room. The room was filled with computer screens and racing equipment. In the center sat a Formula One simulator that looked like a real race car cockpit. Lewis turned on the main computer and logged in with his password. Marcus, what I'm about to show you is top secret. No one outside McLaren is supposed to see this data. On the biggest screen, Lewis pulled up race data from the past 3 seasons. Colorful lines and numbers filled the monitor. Each line represents a different race, Lewis explained. The red lines show where I made mistakes. The blue lines show where Max Verstappen gained time on me. Marcus studied the patterns. Even at 16, he understood racing better than most adults. Lewis, it looks like Max always knows exactly what you're going to do. That's what I want you to see. Look at this race from Monaco last year. Lewis clicked on a specific race. The data showed Lewis and Max battling for position lap after lap. Watch this corner sequence. Lewis pointed to section 3 of the Monaco track. I'm planning to overtake Max on the inside of turn 8. But look what happens. The data showed Max suddenly changing his racing line just before Lewis made his move. Max blocked the exact spot where Lewis was planning to attack. He knew. Marcus said quietly. Now look at Hungary. Lewis opened another file. Same thing. I plan to overtake into turn 2, but Max is already defending before I even start my move. Marcus counted the examples on screen. This happened 12 times in one race. 12 times that we can prove. Probably more that we can't see in the data. Lewis opened a folder labeled Verstappen Strategy Analysis. Inside were dozens of documents studying Max's defensive moves. Our engineers spent months trying to figure out how Max always knows what I'm going to do. They thought maybe Red Bull had better computers or smarter strategists. But it wasn't. Computers? Lewis shook his head. It was human intelligence. Someone who knows me better than I know myself. Lewis pulled up a photo from the 2023 Monaco Grand Prix. The image showed the Red Bull garage during the race. Engineers were working at computers, mechanics were preparing tires, and team leaders were watching monitors. Look at the back corner. Lewis pointed to a man partially hidden behind equipment. Marcus squinted at the screen. Who is that? James Stirling. He's been at every Red Bull race for the past 4 years. Officially, he's just a consultant. But really, he's their secret weapon against me. Lewis zoomed in on James's face. He looked older now, but Marcus could see the resemblance to the young driver in the old photos David had shown him. James watches every move I make during practice sessions. He studies my body language, my driving lines, even how I talk to my engineers on the radio. And then he tells Max how to beat you. He tells the whole Red Bull team. James knows that when I'm frustrated, I brake too late into turn 1. He knows that when I'm angry, I take risks on the outside of corners. He knows that when I'm tired, I make mistakes in the final 10 laps. Lewis opened another file. This one was filled with pages of notes in James's handwriting. Marcus could see his own last name written throughout the document. How did you get James's personal notes? Marcus asked. One of the McLaren engineers used to work for Red Bull. He copied these files before he left. Marcus read some of the notes out loud. Hamilton gets emotional when he falls behind early in the race. Push him hard in the first 5 laps, and he will make mistakes later. Another note said, Hamilton's weakness is his need to prove himself. Make him think you don't respect his driving, and he will try too hard to impress people. This is like a manual for how to destroy your racing, Marcus said. There's more. Lewis scrolled down to find the section that hurt him the most. Read this part. Marcus read, Hamilton carries guilt about the Stirling accident. When racing against drivers who remind him of James Stirling, Hamilton becomes hesitant and defensive. Use this psychological weakness to gain track position. Lewis's voice was barely a whisper. James has turned my guilt into a racing strategy. Every time I see a young driver on track, I think about what I did to James. And somehow, Red Bull knows exactly when that happens. How could James know about your guilt? Because David told him everything. David knew how much the accident affected me. He saw me crying about it. He watched me have nightmares. And when David left our family, he shared all of that information with James. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. So they're using your feelings against you? Lewis nodded. Every race weekend, James Stirling studies new ways to hurt me emotionally. He knows that if he can make me feel guilty or angry or scared, I won't drive as well. Lewis, this isn't fair. This is cheating. It's not against the rules. Team psychology and strategy analysis are completely legal in Formula One. Lewis showed Marcus one final document. It was James's strategy notes for the recent Spanish Grand Prix that Lewis had won. Look at this. Lewis pointed to a section titled Hamilton Family Pressure Points. Marcus read, Hamilton becomes distracted when family members are mentioned in media interviews. His younger brother Marcus is particularly important to him. Consider ways to create family-related stress during race weekends. Marcus stared at the screen. They want to use me against you? James knows that you're the most important person in my life. If something happened to you, or if you were upset with me, it would destroy my concentration completely. Is that why you didn't want me to contact David? You were protecting me. Lewis saved the files and started shutting down the computer. Marcus, James Stirling, and David Stirling have spent 14 years building a weapon designed specifically to destroy my career. They've studied every weakness I have, every fear, every guilty feeling. And now I want to walk right into their trap, Marcus said quietly. If you contact David, if you ask to meet James, you'll be giving them exactly what they want. A way to get close to the Hamilton family again. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. But Lewis, what if they're not trying to hurt us anymore? What if David's letter was real? What if James really is ready to tell the truth about the accident? Lewis looked at his brother. Marcus, after everything I've shown you tonight, do you still want to meet them? Marcus nodded slowly. Yes, but not because I trust them. Because I think you deserve to know the truth about what really happened that day. What if the truth makes everything worse? Then at least we'll know. Back at their mother's house, Marcus went straight to his bedroom and closed the door. Lewis could hear him typing on his laptop for 2 hours. When Marcus finally came out, he had a plan that made Lewis's blood run cold. I've done my research, Marcus announced, setting his laptop on the kitchen table. I know exactly how to find James Sterling. Lewis looked at the screen. Marcus had found James's LinkedIn profile, his Twitter account, and even his home address in Milton Keynes. Marcus, absolutely not. These people are dangerous. Look at this. Marcus ignored Lewis and pointed to James's social media posts. He writes about racing every day, but look at this photo from last week. It was an old picture that James had posted with the caption, "Throwback to better times." The photo showed a young man teaching a toddler how to hold a toy steering wheel. Lewis recognized both faces immediately. That's James and me when I was 2 years old, Marcus said quietly. Lewis stared at the photo. James looked happy in it. Really happy. Not like the angry man Lewis had seen in the Red Bull garage. If James hated our family so much, why would he post this picture? Marcus asked. Lewis didn't have a good answer. Maybe he's trying to confuse us. Maybe it's part of some bigger plan. Or maybe he misses the good times, Marcus suggested. Maybe he misses having a little brother. Marcus showed Lewis more of James's social media. Most posts were about racing or technical car stuff, but scattered throughout were old family photos. James at Marcus's 3rd birthday party. James teaching Marcus to ride a bike. James reading Marcus a bedtime story. He kept all these pictures, Marcus said. For 14 years, he kept photos of me. Lewis felt uncomfortable looking at the images. They showed a side of James Sterling he had never seen. A young man who clearly loved Marcus like a real brother. Marcus, people can love someone and still want to hurt them. James might miss you, but that doesn't mean he's forgiven me. Marcus pulled up another page on his laptop. I found James's work schedule at Red Bull. He goes to lunch at the same restaurant every Thursday at 12:30. It's called the Grid Cafe in Milton Keynes. How do you know all this? He posts photos of his food every week. Always the same table, always the same time. Lewis realized his brother had been planning this much longer than 2 hours. Marcus, how long have you been researching the Sterling family? Marcus looked embarrassed. Since I found the letters 3 days ago, I couldn't sleep, so I spent all night learning about them. What else did you find? Marcus opened another browser tab. David Sterling works as a driving instructor now. He teaches teenagers how to race go-karts. Every Saturday at the Buckmore Park track in Kent. Lewis felt a chill. David is still involved in racing? He never left it completely. Look at his website. The page showed David Sterling standing next to a go-kart with a group of young drivers. The headline read, "Learn from a pro, Sterling Racing Academy." David has been teaching kids to race for the past 10 years, Marcus explained. The reviews say he's really good, patient, and kind. Lewis read some of the testimonials from parents. David helped my son become a much safer driver. Mr. Sterling taught my daughter that racing is about respect, not just speed. David Sterling is the best instructor we've ever had. This doesn't make sense, Lewis said. If David thinks I'm a reckless driver who destroyed his son's career, why is he teaching other kids to race? Marcus had been wondering the same thing. Maybe David doesn't think you're as bad as he pretended to be. Or maybe he's trying to train a new generation of drivers to beat me. Marcus shook his head. Lewis, look at what he teaches. Safety, respect, control. That's not how you train someone to be reckless. Lewis studied the photos on David's website. In every picture, David looked calm and happy. He was smiling with the kids, showing them proper technique, celebrating their small victories. Marcus, what exactly are you planning to do? Marcus took a deep breath. Tomorrow is Thursday. I want to go to the Grid Cafe and wait for James. I'll tell him who I am and ask him to set up a meeting with David. And you think James will just agree to help you? Maybe. Or maybe he'll be angry. But Lewis, I have to try. These two men were my family once. James was like my big brother. David was like my dad. I lost them both because of something that happened. When I was 3 years old, Lewis saw the pain in his brother's eyes. Marcus, what if they reject you? What if they say they don't want you in their lives anymore? Then at least I'll know. But what if they don't reject me? What if they've been missing me as much as I've been missing them? Lewis walked to the window and looked out at the street, where he grew up. Marcus, you don't understand how much anger and pain these people have been carrying. 14 years is a long time to hate someone, but it's also a long time to love someone, Marcus replied. James kept pictures of me. David teaches kids to race safely. Maybe they're not the same angry people they were in 2010. Lewis turned around. And what if this is all a trap? What if they're pretending to miss you just to get close to our family? Again, Marcus had thought about this too. Then I'll figure it out. Lewis, I'm not stupid. If James or David try to hurt me or use me against you, I'll see it coming. Will you? Marcus, you're 16 years old. These are grown men who have been planning revenge for 14 years. They're experts at manipulation and psychology. Marcus stood up and walked to his brother. Lewis, do you trust me? Of course. I trust you. Then trust me to handle this. I know it's dangerous. I know they might try to hurt me. But I also know that I can't spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I had been brave enough to try. Lewis looked at his little brother. Marcus had their father Anthony's determination and their mother's intelligence. But he also had something else, hope that Lewis had lost years ago. If you're going to do this, Lewis said slowly, you're not going alone. Lewis, no. If James sees you, it will ruin everything. He'll think it's some kind of attack or setup. I won't go inside the restaurant, but I'll be in the parking lot. If something goes wrong, if you need help, I'll be there. Marcus smiled for the first time in days. You'll really let me do this? Lewis sighed. Marcus, I think you're going to do it whether I let you or not. At least this way, I can try to protect you. What if James agrees to arrange a meeting with David? Lewis felt fear rising in his chest. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Marcus, promise me something. What? Promise me that if anything feels wrong, if James or David say or do anything that makes you uncomfortable, you'll leave immediately. Marcus nodded. I promise. Lewis looked at his brother's laptop screen, still showing James Sterling's social media photos. In every picture with Marcus, James looked genuinely happy. But Lewis also knew that people could change completely in 14 years. Marcus, what if the truth about the accident is worse than what we already know? Marcus closed his laptop. Then we'll face it together. But Lewis, what if the truth is better? What if there's something about that day that could change everything? Thursday morning came with heavy rain clouds over Milton Keynes. Lewis drove Marcus through the industrial area where Red Bull Racing had their headquarters. The huge building with its blue and silver logo looked like a fortress. Lewis parked across the street from the Grid Cafe at 11:45 a.m. He wore a black baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and dark sunglasses, hoping no one would recognize him. Remember the plan, Lewis said to Marcus. If anything feels wrong, just walk away. Marcus nodded, but Lewis could see his hands shaking slightly. What? If James doesn't show up? Then we go home and think of another way. At exactly 12:25 p.m., a tall, thin man walked out of the Red Bull building. Even from across the street, Lewis recognized James Sterling immediately. He walked with a slight limp, a reminder of the accident that changed everything. Marcus took a deep breath. Here I go. Lewis watched his brother cross the street and enter the cafe. Through the windows, Lewis could see Marcus sitting at a table near the entrance, pretending to read a menu. 5 minutes later, James Sterling walked into the cafe. He ordered his usual sandwich and sat at his regular table in the corner. For several minutes, Marcus just watched him, building up courage. Finally, Marcus stood up and walked over to James's table. Lewis couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see their body language. James looked shocked when Marcus first spoke to him. Then James glanced around the cafe nervously, as if looking for someone. That's when Lewis saw James's eyes find him through the window. Even with sunglasses and a hat, James recognized him immediately. James's expression changed completely. The surprise became something else, something that made Lewis feel sick to his stomach. James was smiling. Not a happy smile. A cold, calculating smile that Lewis had seen before in the Red Bull garage. Lewis watched as James stood up and put his hand on Marcus's shoulder in what looked like a friendly gesture. But Lewis could see James's eyes scanning the parking lot, taking note of Lewis's car, memorizing details. James said something to Marcus that made his brother nod eagerly. Then James led Marcus toward the back of the cafe, away from the windows where Lewis could see them. Lewis felt panic rising in his chest. This was wrong. Everything about James's reaction was wrong that he got out of his car and started walking toward the cafe. But before he could reach the door, his phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Everything is fine. James wants to take me to see David. He's here today at Red Bull. Don't follow us." Lewis stared at the message. Something about it didn't feel right. Marcus usually used different words when he texted. And David Sterling working at Red Bull Racing? That seemed impossible. Lewis tried to call Marcus, but the phone went straight to voicemail. Through the cafe window, Lewis could see that Marcus and James were gone. They must have left through a back exit. Lewis ran to his car and drove around to the back of the building. He saw James's silver BMW pulling out of the parking lot with Marcus in the passenger seat. Lewis followed them, staying far enough back to avoid being seen. Instead of driving to David Sterling's house or to a neutral meeting place, James was driving straight toward Red Bull Racing headquarters. This was definitely a trap. James parked in the Red Bull employee lot and led Marcus toward a side entrance. Lewis parked behind a delivery truck and watched as James used his security card to get them inside the building. Lewis sat in his car, feeling helpless. His little brother was now inside Red Bull Racing with a man who had spent 4 years planning ways to destroy Lewis's career. After 20 minutes, Lewis couldn't wait anymore. He walked to the main entrance of Red Bull Racing and tried to get inside. "I'm sorry, sir," the security guard said. "You need an appointment and proper identification to enter this building. I'm Lewis Hamilton. My brother is inside with James Sterling. I need to make sure he's safe." The security guard looked confused. "Mr. Hamilton, I wasn't told about any scheduled visits today. Let me call Mr. Sterling's office." Lewis waited while the guard made his phone call. The conversation was short and quiet. "Mr. Sterling says he's not meeting with anyone today," the guard reported. "He says he doesn't know anything about your brother." Lewis felt cold fear wash over him. "That's impossible. I saw them go inside together 30 minutes ago." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property. If you continue to insist on entering without authorization, I'll have to call the police." Lewis walked back to his car, his mind racing. James Sterling had Marcus inside Red Bull Racing and was denying that he was even there. This was much worse than Lewis had imagined. Lewis tried calling Marcus again. Still voicemail that he sent text messages. "Marcus, where are you? Marcus, please answer your phone. Marcus, I'm worried about you." No responses. Lewis sat in his car for another hour, watching the building. Employees came and went through various entrances, but he never saw Marcus or James. Finally, Lewis's phone rang. It was Marcus. "Lewis, guess what? I'm with David right now." Marcus sounded excited and happy, but something in his voice seemed off, like he was trying too hard to sound normal. "Marcus, where are you exactly?" "We're in James's office at Red Bull. David was here for a meeting, just like James said." "Lewis, David wants to talk to you. Put him on the phone. He says he'd rather talk in person. Can you come inside?" Lewis felt his heart pounding. "Marcus, the security guard told me James isn't meeting with anyone today. He said James doesn't know anything about you." There was a pause. "Oh, that's just a misunderstanding. James told security not to mention our meeting because it's private family business." "Marcus, are you okay? Are you safe?" "Of course I'm safe. Lewis, David has been telling me stories about when I was little. He remembers everything. My first steps, my favorite toys, the songs he used to sing to me." Lewis could hear other voices in the background, male voices talking quietly. "Marcus, I want you to leave right now. Just tell them you need to use the bathroom and walk out of the building." "Lewis, you're being paranoid. David and James just want to have an honest conversation about what happened in 2010. They say there are things about the accident that you don't know." "What things?" "They want to tell you in person. David says it's too important to discuss over the phone." Lewis made a decision. "Marcus, I'm coming inside. Tell James that if he wants to talk, he needs to meet me in the main lobby." "Okay, I'll tell him." The phone went quiet for a moment. Lewis could hear muffled conversation, but he couldn't make out the words. Marcus came back on the line. "Lewis, James says he'll meet you in the lobby in 5 minutes. He says to come alone and don't bring any recording devices. I'll be there." Lewis hung up and walked toward the Red Bull building. Every instinct he had was screaming that this was dangerous. But Marcus was inside, and Lewis couldn't leave his brother alone with people who had spent years planning revenge. As he approached the entrance, Lewis wondered if he was about to learn the truth about the 2010 accident, or if he was walking into the most elaborate trap of his life. Lewis walked through the main entrance of Red Bull Racing. The same security guard who had turned him away earlier now waved him through without question. This sudden change made Lewis even more nervous. The lobby was impressive, with championship trophies in glass cases and huge photos of Max Verstappen winning races. But Lewis barely noticed the decorations. He was focused on finding Marcus. James Sterling appeared from a side hallway, walking slowly because of his old leg injury. He looked different up close than he had through the cafe window. Older, thinner, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. "Lewis Hamilton," James said, extending his hand for a handshake. "It's been a long time." Lewis didn't shake the offered hand. "Where is my brother?" "Marcus is safe. He's upstairs with David, looking at old photo albums. They're having quite a reunion. I want to see him." James smiled, the same cold smile Lewis had seen through the cafe window. "Of course. But first, I thought you might like to see something interesting." James led Lewis through hallways covered with racing photos. Lewis saw pictures of Sebastian Vettel, Daniel Ricciardo, and Max Verstappen celebrating victories. But no pictures of Lewis, even though he had won races against all these drivers. "Impressive facility," James said as they walked. "We have everything here. Simulators, wind tunnels, engineering labs, even a museum of Formula One history." "I'm not here for a tour, James." "Oh, but you should see our special collection. We have detailed records of every major Formula One accident from the past 20 years." They entered a large room filled with computers and video screens. Lewis recognized it immediately from the data files Marcus had shown him. This was where Red Bull analyzed their competitors, but the room looked different now than in the stolen photos Lewis had seen. One entire wall was covered with a massive timeline, not of Red Bull's victories, but of Lewis Hamilton's career. Every race Lewis had ever driven was marked on the timeline. His wins were in green, his losses in red, his crashes in black. But it wasn't a celebration of his achievements. It was a detailed study of his failures. "Impressive, isn't it?" James said, watching Lewis's reaction. "We've been tracking your career for 14 years. Every mistake, every weakness, every moment of doubt." Lewis stared at the wall. There were hundreds of data points, thousands of notes, detailed analysis of every aspect of his racing and personal life. "Marcus was right," Lewis said quietly. "You know me better than I know myself." "We know exactly how you think," James agreed. "How you react under pressure, what makes you angry, what makes you afraid." James walked to a computer terminal and pulled up a video file. "For example, we know that you drive differently when family members are watching. You take fewer risks when someone you love might be worried about you." The screen showed video from the 2023 British Grand Prix. Lewis could see his own mother in the Mercedes garage, looking nervous during the race. "Watch your lap times." James pointed to numbers on the screen. "In the first 10 laps, when you can see your mother on the pit wall, you're driving 0.2 of a second slower than your maximum pace." Lewis felt sick. "You've been watching. My family. We watch everything. Your mother, your friends, your social media posts. We know when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're confident, when you're struggling." James clicked to another video. This one showed Marcus at Lewis's last race victory, cheering from the VIP section. "And we've been particularly interested in your relationship with your little brother." Lewis's hands clenched into fists. "If you hurt him, relax," James interrupted. "We're not going to hurt Marcus. We're going to use him." "What does that mean?" James pulled up another file on his computer. "Lewis, do you want to know what really happened on July 11th, 2010? "I know what happened. I crashed into you. I ended your career." James shook his head. "No, that's what McLaren told everyone. That's what the official report says. But it's not the truth." Lewis felt confused. "What are you talking about?" The truth is much more interesting than a simple driver error. James typed commands into his computer. Security footage from Silverstone in 2010 appeared on the main screen. Lewis recognized the track layout and his own McLaren from 14 years ago. This is footage from turn 15, where our accident happened. But this isn't the angle that was shown to investigators. Lewis watched his car approaching the corner where James was practicing. The video was shot from high above the track, showing both cars clearly. "Watch carefully," James said. "Look at your steering wheel just before impact." Lewis stared at the screen. In the video, he could see his own hands on the steering wheel. Everything looked normal until the final 3 seconds before the crash. Suddenly, the steering wheel jerked hard to the right, completely out of Lewis's control. "What is that?" Lewis whispered. "Mechanical failure," James said simply. "Your steering system malfunctioned for exactly 2.7 seconds. You had no control over the car." Lewis felt the room spinning around him. "That's impossible." The investigators checked everything. McLaren's engineers examined every part of the car. James opened a thick folder filled with technical documents. Oh, they found the failure. The steering sensor had a software glitch that caused temporary loss of control. But McLaren decided to bury the report. Why would they do that? Because admitting a technical failure would have been much worse for McLaren's reputation than blaming driver error. Ron Dennis, your team principal, made the decision to let you take the blame. Lewis sat down hard in a nearby chair. "You mean it wasn't my fault? The crash was caused by a computer malfunction that you couldn't have predicted or prevented. You didn't drive recklessly that day, Lewis. You were actually being very careful." Lewis stared at the technical documents. Pages and pages of data showing exactly what had gone wrong with his car. But why didn't anyone tell me? Why did McLaren let me believe I had caused the accident? James's expression grew darker. Because Ron Dennis thought it would be easier for you to carry the guilt than for McLaren to face a lawsuit. They threw you under the bus to protect themselves. And you've known this for 14 years. "No," James said quietly. "I only found out 3 years ago when a former McLaren engineer brought me these documents. I spent 11 years hating you for something you never did." Lewis looked up at James. "If you knew it wasn't my fault, why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep helping Red Bull beat me?" James walked to the window overlooking the Red Bull factory. "Because by the time I learned the truth, I had already built my entire career on revenge against you. My job, my reputation, my purpose in life. Everything was based on proving that Lewis Hamilton was a reckless driver who destroyed my future. So you kept quiet to protect yourself?" "I kept quiet because I didn't know how to admit that I'd been wrong for 11 years. And because David still blamed you." Lewis felt confused. "David doesn't know the truth either." "David knows. I showed him the technical reports last year. But David says it doesn't matter whether the crash was mechanical failure or driver error. He says you still took away his son's racing career, and you still broke up our family." Lewis stood up. "Where is Marcus? I want to see my brother right now." James smiled again. "Marcus is learning some very interesting things about the Hamilton family. Things you never told him." "What things?" "Come with me, Lewis. It's time you face the truth about why David Sterling really left your family." James led Lewis up 2 flights of stairs to a conference room with glass walls. Through the windows, Lewis could see the entire Red Bull factory floor below, but his attention was immediately drawn to the people inside the room. Marcus sat at a large table, looking through photo albums with an older man. Lewis recognized David Sterling immediately, even though his hair was now gray and his face showed the lines of 14 hard years. But what shocked Lewis most was seeing his mother, Carmen Hamilton, sitting calmly at the same table. "Mom," Lewis said as James opened the door. "What are you doing here?" Carmen looked up with tired eyes. "Hello, Lewis. I was wondering when you would arrive." Marcus jumped up and ran to his brother. "Lewis, you're not going to believe what I've learned." Lewis hugged Marcus tightly, checking to make sure his brother was unharmed. "Are you okay? Did anyone hurt you?" "I'm fine. Better than fine. Lewis, David has been telling me about when I was little, and Mom has been explaining things that I never understood." Lewis looked around the room suspiciously. "Mom, how did you get here? How did you even know about this meeting?" Carmen exchanged glances with David Sterling. "Lewis, I think you should sit down. There are things you need to know." Lewis remained standing. "I'm not sitting down until someone explains what's going on." James just showed me proof that the 2010 accident was caused by mechanical failure, not driver error. Did you all know this? David Sterling spoke for the first time. His voice was quieter and sadder than Lewis remembered. Yes, we've all known. For several years. And nobody thought to tell me. We've been trying to find the right way, Carmen said softly. Lewis, the accident wasn't the only secret we've been keeping. James walked to a computer in the corner of the room. Lewis, remember, when you asked Marcus how he knew to look for those letters in your mother's attic? He said he was looking for photos for my birthday. That's true, Marcus said. But Mom had moved the Christmas decorations to make sure I would find that specific box. Lewis stared at his mother. You wanted Marcus to find David's letters? Carmen nodded. I've been in contact with David for 8 months, Lewis. We've been planning this reunion. Lewis felt like the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. You've been working with them? Against me, not against you, David said firmly. For you, Lewis. We could all see that carrying the guilt from 2010 was destroying your happiness. You needed to learn the truth. But why all the secrecy? Why this elaborate plan? Carmen stood up and walked to her son. Because none of us knew how to start the conversation. David was ashamed of leaving Marcus. James was embarrassed about spending years on revenge for something that wasn't your fault. And you were too guilty to reach out to anyone. Marcus opened one of the photo albums on the table. Lewis, look at this. The photos showed the Hamilton family from 2007 to 2010. Lewis, Marcus, Carmen, Anthony Hamilton, and David Sterling. They look like a real family. Christmas mornings, birthday parties, visits to the go-kart track. David was never just Marcus's father figure, Carmen explained. He was part of our whole family. When he left after the accident, he didn't just abandon Marcus. He abandoned all of us. David wiped tears from his eyes. Carmen, Anthony, and I used to talk every week about how to help you boys with your racing careers. We were a team. Lewis looked at more photos. David teaching both Lewis and Marcus about racing. David celebrating Lewis's early victories. David and Anthony working together to build Lewis's first go-kart. I don't understand, Lewis said. If David cared about our whole family, why did he blame me for the accident? James answered, because David never really blamed you. He blamed himself. What? David sat down heavily in a chair. Lewis, the day of your accident, I was supposed to be at Silverstone with you. I was your mentor and advisor. But I chose to stay home with Marcus instead because he had a fever. Lewis remembered that day. You said Marcus needed you more than I did. If I had been there, if I had been watching your practice session, I might have noticed the technical problems with your car. I might have been able to prevent the accident. Carmen sat next to David. David convinced himself that James got hurt because he wasn't doing his job as Lewis's mentor. So when James needed someone to blame for the accident, David continued, I let him blame you instead of me. It was easier to be angry at you than to face my own guilt. Lewis felt overwhelmed. So you left Marcus to punish yourself, not to punish me? I left because I couldn't look at your family without being reminded of my failure. Every time I saw you or Marcus, I thought about how I could have prevented James's accident. James walked back from the computer. Lewis, my father and I have been carrying the same guilt you have. We've all been blaming ourselves for what happened that day. Marcus looked confused. But if everyone knew the accident was caused by mechanical failure, why didn't you just tell the truth years ago? Carmen answered, because McLaren threatened legal action against anyone who revealed the technical problems. They said sharing the information would violate confidentiality agreements. But 3 years ago, when James first learned the truth, he brought the evidence to David. Lewis's mother continued. They realized they had been wrong about you all these years. So why wait until now to tell me? Lewis asked. David looked embarrassed. Because we didn't know how to admit we had been wrong for so long. James had built his career on revenge against you. I had spent years teaching Marcus to live without a father figure. How do you apologize for that kind of damage? James nodded. And frankly, we weren't sure you would forgive us. We thought you might be happier not knowing the truth. Marcus stood up. But I convinced them you deserve to know. I told them that keeping secrets was hurting everyone. Lewis looked at his 16-year-old brother with new respect. You planned all of this? Not exactly. But when I found David's letters, I called the phone number on them. David and I talked for hours. Then David called Mom. Then James joined our conversations. Carmen smiled. Marcus convinced all of us that our family needed to heal. He said he wanted his father figure back, and he wanted his brother to stop feeling guilty about things that weren't his fault. Your brother is very wise, David said. He helped us realize that we had all been prisoners of our own anger and guilt. Lewis sat down finally, feeling exhausted. So the letters Marcus found, the research he did on James's schedule, bringing me to Red Bull today, it was all planned? We hoped you would come, James admitted. We thought if you were worried about Marcus, you might be willing to face us. And we were right, Marcus added with a grin. Lewis looked around the room at these people who had been such an important part of his life. So what happens now? David leaned forward. Now we figure out how to be a family again, if you want that. And I stop helping Red Bull beat you in races, James said. I've already resigned from my consulting position. Carmen reached for Lewis's hand. And we stopped keeping secrets from each other. Marcus opened another photo album. And maybe we can make some new family photos. Lewis felt tears starting in his eyes. For 14 years, he had carried the weight of an accident that wasn't his fault, missing people who had never stopped loving him. There's one more thing, David said quietly. Lewis, I owe you an apology not just for leaving, but for something else. What? For letting you believe you were a reckless driver. For letting you think you weren't good enough to be champion. The truth is, you've always been one of the most careful and skilled drivers I've ever seen. James nodded in agreement. Even my revenge against you proved how good you are. I spent 4 years giving Max Verstappen every advantage I could think of, and you still won races. Lewis looked at his little brother. Marcus, how did you know this would work out? Marcus smiled. Because I know our family. We're fighters, but we're also forgivers. And we love each other too much to stay angry. Forever. David Sterling wiped tears from his eyes as he looked at Lewis. Son, there's something else you need to see. Something that will help you understand why this reunion was so important. James walked back to the computer terminal. Lewis, when I showed you the security footage downstairs, I only showed you part of the story. There's more video from that day that no one has ever seen. Lewis felt his stomach tighten. What do you mean? I mean, there were 6 different cameras recording your accident from different angles. McLaren only shared one angle with the investigators. The other 5 videos were classified as confidential technical data. James pulled up a new video file. This footage was taken from inside your McLaren cockpit. It shows exactly what you experienced during those 2.7 seconds when your steering failed. The screen showed the view from Lewis's helmet camera in 2010. Lewis could see his own hands on the steering wheel as he approached turn 15 at Silverstone. Watch what happens to your hands, David said quietly. In the video, Lewis could see himself setting up for a normal practice lap. His hands were steady on the wheel, his movements smooth and controlled. Then suddenly, the steering wheel jerked violently to the right. Lewis watched his own hands fight against the wheel, trying desperately to regain control. For 2.7 seconds, the car completely ignored his steering inputs. You can see yourself trying to correct the problem, James pointed out. You never stopped fighting to avoid the crash. The video showed Lewis's hands moving quickly, trying every technique he knew to regain control. But the car's computer system had failed completely. Lewis, David said softly, you were not reckless that day. You were actually being very careful. The data shows you were driving 3 seconds slower than your maximum pace because you were being cautious in practice. Carmen moved closer to her son. Lewis, do you remember what you told me after the accident? Lewis nodded. I said I felt like the car had a mind of its own for a few seconds. That's because it did. The steering computer was making decisions without your input. James opened another file. Here's what the McLaren engineers found when they examined your car after the crash. The technical report was filled with complex diagrams and computer codes, but one section was highlighted in red: steering sensor malfunction, complete loss of driver control for 2.7 seconds. The malfunction was caused by a software update that McLaren had installed the night before, James explained. They were testing new steering assistance technology, but it wasn't ready for racing conditions. Lewis stared at the report. So, McLaren knew their experimental software caused the accident. Within hours of the crash, David confirmed. But admitting that would have meant admitting they put experimental technology in a race car without proper testing. Carmen handed Lewis another document. This is the original accident report that McLaren's engineers wrote immediately after examining your car. Lewis read the conclusion. Driver input had no effect on vehicle trajectory during critical 2.7-second period. Accident was caused by steering system malfunction, not driver error. Recommend immediate review of experimental software protocols. But this isn't the report that was filed with the racing authorities, Lewis said. No, James replied. Ron Dennis ordered the engineers to write a different report, one that blamed driver error instead of technical failure. David pulled out a thick folder. Lewis, James spent 2 years collecting evidence about McLaren's cover-up. He has emails, meeting notes, and witness statements from engineers who were forced to lie about what really happened. Lewis looked through the documents. Email after email showed McLaren executives discussing how to avoid blame for the technical failure. One email from Ron Dennis read, "Hamilton is young and will recover from this setback. McLaren's reputation cannot survive a revelation that we put experimental software in a race car. The driver error explanation protects the company and the sport." Another email from a McLaren engineer said, "I don't feel comfortable blaming Lewis for something that was clearly a technical failure, but I understand the commercial pressures involved. They sacrificed my reputation to save their own," Lewis said quietly. "And they made James believe you were a reckless driver who had destroyed his future," David added. "McLaren's lie hurt both of you." Marcus looked up from the photo albums. "So everyone suffered because McLaren was afraid to tell the truth." "Everyone except McLaren," James said bitterly. "They went on to win more championships while you carried guilt that wasn't yours, and I carried anger that wasn't justified." Lewis sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything he had learned. "James, if you've had this evidence for 3 years, why didn't you expose McLaren's cover-up?" James looked embarrassed. "Because I was afraid. By the time I learned the truth, I had spent 11 years building my career on the story that you were a dangerous driver. If I admitted I was wrong, I would lose my job and my reputation. And because I was afraid too," David added. "I had spent 11 years justifying my decision to leave Marcus by blaming you for the accident. Admitting the truth would mean admitting I abandoned my family for no good reason." Carmen reached for Lewis's hand. "Son, we've all been cowards. We were more afraid of facing our mistakes than we were committed to doing what was right. But Marcus changed that," David said, looking at the 16-year-old with admiration. "When he called me 8 months ago, he said something that shook me to my core." "What did he say?" Lewis asked. Marcus blushed. "I told David that I would rather have a father who admits his mistakes than no father at all. And I told him that you would rather know the truth and be hurt than live with lies and be confused. Marcus convinced me that our family deserved honesty, even if it was painful," David explained. James nodded. "And he convinced me that my revenge against you was hurting more people than just you. It was hurting Marcus, who missed his father figure. It was hurting David, who missed his family. And it was hurting me because I was building my life on a lie." Lewis looked at his little brother with new respect. "Marcus, you orchestrated all of this to help everyone in our family?" "I orchestrated it because I was tired of watching everyone I love carry pain that didn't belong to them," Marcus replied. "You were guilty about an accident that wasn't your fault." David was ashamed of a decision that made sense at the time. James was angry about something that was never personal. Mom was sad because her family was broken. Carmen wiped tears from her eyes. Marcus spent hours talking to each of us separately, helping us understand that we all wanted the same thing: to be a family again. "But he also made it clear that we had to tell you the truth first," David said. "He refused to have a relationship with me unless we cleared your name about the accident." Lewis felt overwhelmed by his brother's wisdom and courage. "Marcus, you could have just asked me to contact David directly. Why did you create this whole elaborate plan?" Marcus grinned. "Because I know you, Lewis. If I had just said, 'Hey, David wants to apologize,' you would have said, 'It's fine, don't worry about it,' and never dealt with your real feelings. And if I had called you directly," David added, "you would have been polite but cautious. You wouldn't have trusted that I really wanted to make things right." James nodded. "And if I had just sent you the technical evidence about the accident, you might have thought it was fake or part of some new strategy to mess with your head. So we needed you to see everything in person," Carmen explained. "We needed you to see that we were all here together, all committed to healing our family." Lewis looked around the room at these people who had gone to such elaborate lengths to help him. So my simple little brother's simple wish to meet David was actually the most complicated family intervention in history. Marcus laughed. Sometimes, the simplest wishes require the most complicated plans. David stood up and walked to Lewis. Son, can you forgive an old man for making the worst decision of his life? Lewis stood up and hugged David for the first time in 14 years. Can you forgive a young man for carrying guilt that made him push away the people who loved him? We all have things to forgive, Carmen said. Joining the hug, James approached. Slowly, still uncertain of his welcome. Lewis, I don't know if you can ever forgive me for the years I spent trying to destroy your career, but I want you to know that I'm going to spend however long it takes making up for what I did. Lewis extended his hand to James. We both lost something that day at Silverstone. Maybe it's time we stopped fighting about it and started healing from it. As the five of them stood together, Lewis realized that his brother's simple wish had accomplished something that seemed impossible just a week ago. Their broken family was whole again. 2 hours later, the family sat in a circle in the Red Bull conference room. Outside the windows, the afternoon sun was setting over Milton Keynes. For the first time in 14 years, everyone was together and all the secrets were finally out. But Lewis knew the hardest part was still ahead. Knowing the truth was different from knowing how to move forward. I need to ask everyone something, Lewis said, breaking the comfortable silence. Now that we know what really happened, what do we do about it? David leaned forward in his chair. What do you mean? I mean, do we tell the world about McLaren's cover-up? Do we expose Ron Dennis and the engineers who lied? Do we clear my name? Publicly. James shifted uncomfortably. Lewis, revealing the truth could hurt a lot of people. Ron Dennis is retired now. Some of the engineers who were forced to lie still work in Formula One. But they let me carry the blame for 14 years, Lewis replied. They let the world believe I was a reckless driver who destroyed your career. Carmen spoke up. Son, you have every right to be angry. But we need to think carefully about what's best for everyone. Marcus looked confused. Why wouldn't we tell the truth? If Lewis didn't cause the accident, everyone should know that. David sighed. Because revealing the truth now could cause chaos in Formula One. If people learn that McLaren covered up a technical failure that caused a serious accident, it might make fans lose trust in the safety of racing. And it could hurt McLaren's current drivers, James added. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri had nothing to do with what happened in 2010. Why should their careers suffer because of decisions made before they were even professional drivers? Lewis stood up and walked to the window. So you're saying I should keep protecting the people who betrayed me? We're saying you should think about what you really want to accomplish, Carmen said gently. Lewis stared out at the Red Bull factory. I want justice. I want people to know I'm not the kind of driver who hurts other people. But Lewis, Marcus said quietly, the people who matter already know that. Your fans know you're not reckless. Other drivers know you're careful and fair. The only person who didn't know the truth was you. James nodded. Marcus is right. In the racing community, you're respected as one of the safest drivers on the grid. Your reputation recovered years ago. Then why do I still feel like I need to prove myself? Lewis asked. David stood up and joined Lewis at the window. Because you've been carrying guilt and shame for so long. You forgot what it feels like to race without that weight on your shoulders. When I was your mentor before the accident, David continued, you were fearless but careful. You took calculated risks, not stupid ones. You raced to win, but never at the expense of other people's safety. Lewis looked at David. Will I be able to race like that again? You already do, James said from across the room. Lewis, I spent 4 years studying every move you make on track. Even when I was trying to find your weaknesses, I had to admit that you're one of the most respectful competitors in Formula One. That's why it was so hard to beat you, James continued. You don't make the kinds of mistakes that angry or reckless drivers make. You think before you act, even at 300 kilometers per hour. Carmen walked over to her sons. Lewis, your father Anthony always said that the accident changed you in one positive way. It made you more aware of how your actions affect other people. Maybe carrying that guilt for 14 years taught you something valuable, Marcus suggested. Maybe it made you a better driver and a better person. Lewis thought about his recent races. Even when he was frustrated with Max Verstappen, even when Red Bull seemed to know his every move, He had never retaliated with dangerous driving. But I lost so many races because I was afraid to take risks, Lewis said. No, James corrected him. You lost races because I was feeding your strategies to Red Bull. Your careful driving kept you competitive despite being sabotaged. David put his hand on Lewis's shoulder. Son, I've watched every race you've driven since 2010. You've never once done anything that reminded me of a reckless driver. Not once. Lewis felt tears starting in his eyes. Then why do I still doubt myself? Because you're human, Carmen answered. Because carrying guilt for 14 years doesn't just disappear. In one afternoon, Marcus stood up and joined his family at the window. Lewis, can I tell you what I think we should do? Of course. I think we should focus on healing our family instead of punishing McLaren. I think we should use this truth to make us stronger, not to make other people weaker. James nodded. I agree with Marcus. Lewis, you don't need the world to know about McLaren's cover-up to prove you're a good driver. Your results prove that. And exposing the cover-up won't change what happened. To James, David added, it won't give him back his racing career. Lewis looked at James. Are you okay with keeping this secret? Don't you want people to know that the accident wasn't really my fault? James thought for a moment. What I want is for all of us to move forward without anger. I spent 14 years being bitter about my accident. I don't want to spend the next 14 years being bitter about McLaren's cover-up. Besides, James continued, I have a new plan for my career now. What kind of plan? James smiled. I want to become a driving instructor, like David. I want to teach young drivers how to race safely and fairly. I want to use everything I learned about racing psychology to help people, not hurt them. David's face lit up. James, that's a wonderful idea. We could work together. Sterling Racing Academy could become a family business. Marcus grinned. And I could help when I'm old enough. I've been learning about racing my whole life. Carmen clapped her hands. Now that sounds like a much better use of everyone's talents than plotting revenge. Lewis felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. So we're really going to keep McLaren's secret? We're going to focus on our future instead of our past, David said. But Lewis, Marcus added seriously, if you ever change your mind, if you ever decide you need the world to know the truth, we'll support you completely. James nodded. And I still have all the evidence. If McLaren ever tries to blame you for anything again, or if they hurt another driver with cover-ups, we can expose everything. Lewis looked around at his family. So we're choosing forgiveness over justice. We're choosing healing over revenge, Carmen corrected. Justice would be nice, but healing is more important. David walked back to the table and picked up one of the photo albums. Lewis, look at this picture. It was from Marcus's 4th birthday party in 2011, 1 year after the accident. In the photo, Lewis was teaching Marcus how to blow out candles, while Carmen and Anthony watched proudly. David wasn't in this picture because he had already left our family, Carmen explained. But look how happy everyone else looks. Lewis studied the photo. Despite all the pain and guilt he was carrying, he was smiling genuinely at his little brother. Even in your darkest time, you were still a loving brother, David observed. The accident didn't change who you are at heart. Marcus pointed to another photo from 2015. Lewis was celebrating a race victory while Marcus cheered from the crowd. And look at this one. Even when you were struggling with guilt, you were still winning races and making your family proud. Lewis realized his brother was right. The accident had affected him, but it hadn't destroyed him. I have one more question, Lewis said. What do we tell people about this reunion? The media will notice that we're all together again. James thought. For a moment. We tell them the truth, just not the whole truth. We say that Marcus wanted to reconnect with David, and that brought all of us together to heal old wounds. We don't need to mention the technical evidence or McLaren's cover-up. David agreed. We just say that time and family love helped us forgive each other. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. And we say that sometimes families go through hard times, but they can always find their way back to each other if they're willing to try. Carmen smiled at her youngest son. Marcus, you should be a diplomat when you grow up. You're very good at bringing people together. Actually, Marcus said with a mischievous grin, I want to be a racing driver like Lewis. But a racing driver who brings families together instead of breaking them apart. Lewis laughed for the first time all day. Well, you'll definitely be the most emotionally intelligent driver on the grid. As the sun finished setting outside the Red Bull building, Lewis realized that his little brother's simple wish had accomplished something much bigger than anyone had imagined. Not only was their family whole again, but they had all learned something valuable about the power of truth, forgiveness, and love. The guilt that had haunted Lewis for 14 years was finally gone. And in its place was something much stronger. The knowledge that he was surrounded by people who loved him enough to fight for his happiness, even when it meant admitting their own mistakes. 3 weeks later, Lewis stood on the podium at the Hungarian Grand Prix, holding his first-place trophy high above his head. The crowd was cheering, cameras were flashing, and champagne was spraying everywhere. But what made this victory special wasn't the trophy or the points. It was seeing his whole family in the crowd below. Marcus was jumping up and down in the VIP section, wearing a Mercedes team shirt and screaming, "That's my brother." David and James stood next to him, clapping and smiling. Carmen was crying happy tears, and even Anthony Hamilton had flown in from England to celebrate. For the first time in 14 years, Lewis had won a race with his entire family watching. And for the first time in his career, he had driven completely, free from guilt and fear. After the podium ceremony, Lewis found his family in the Mercedes hospitality area. Everyone was talking at once, reliving the exciting moments of the race. "Lewis, that overtake on Max in turn 2 was incredible," Marcus said, his eyes shining with excitement. "The way you defended your position in the final 10 laps was perfect," James added. "You didn't make a single mistake under pressure." David nodded approvingly. "That was the Lewis Hamilton I remember from when you were young. Confident, smart, but always respectful of other drivers." Lewis hugged each of them. "I couldn't have driven like that 3 weeks ago." Knowing the truth about the accident changed everything. Carmen wiped tears from her eyes. "I could see the difference even on television. You looked relaxed and happy in the car." "Because I wasn't fighting myself anymore," Lewis explained. "For the first time since 2010, I was just racing. No guilt, no fear, no doubt about whether I deserved to be there." Marcus pulled Lewis aside. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." Marcus looked a little embarrassed. 3 weeks ago, when I called you and said I had a simple wish, I wasn't completely honest with you." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "My wish wasn't really just to meet David. That was part of it, but not the whole thing." "Then what was your real wish?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I wish for our family to be whole again. All of us together, no more secrets, no more pain. I wish for you to stop carrying sadness that didn't belong to you." Lewis stared at his brother. "Marcus, that's not a simple wish. That's the most complicated wish in the world." "I know, but I also knew it was possible. I could see that everyone in our family still loved each other. We were just all too scared or proud to admit our mistakes." Lewis sat down on a nearby chair. "So when you found those letters in the attic, you already knew Mom had put them there for you to find?" Marcus nodded. "I suspected it. The Christmas decorations were in the wrong place, and Mom had been asking weird questions about whether you seemed happy. And you played along with the whole plan." "I helped create the plan," Marcus corrected. "Lewis, I spent 2 months talking to David on the phone before we arranged that meeting at Red Bull. We had to make sure James was ready to tell the truth, and that Mom was ready to admit her part in keeping secrets." Lewis felt amazed by his brother's planning. "Marcus, you were manipulating all of us. I was helping all of you find the courage to do what you already wanted to do," Marcus said. "David wanted to apologize to you and come back to our family. James wanted to stop carrying anger about something that wasn't personal. Mom wanted her family to be together again. And you wanted to stop feeling guilty about an accident that wasn't your fault. But none of us knew how to start that conversation." "Exactly. So I started it for you." Lewis looked at his 16-year-old brother with new respect. "How did you get so wise?" Marcus grinned. "I learned from watching you. You taught me that family is the most important thing in the world. You showed me that sometimes you have to fight for the people you love, even when it's scary or difficult." "When did I teach you that?" "Every day of my life." "Lewis, you could have forgotten about me when you became famous. You could have been too busy with racing to care about a little kid in Stevenage. But you always made time for me. You always made me feel important." Lewis felt tears starting in his eyes. "You are important. You're the most important person in my life." "I know, and that's why I couldn't watch you be sad anymore. You gave me everything: love, support, inspiration, confidence. The least I could do was give you back your happiness." Lewis hugged his brother tightly. "Marcus, You didn't just give me back my happiness. You gave me back my family. We gave each other back our family, Marcus corrected. But Lewis, there's one more part of my wish that I haven't told you about. What's that? Marcus looked serious. I wish that someday you would win a championship while our whole family was together to celebrate it. Lewis laughed. Marcus, winning championships is really hard. It takes perfect cars, perfect strategy, perfect luck, and perfect driving. Marcus interrupted, which you just proved you can still do. James walked over to join them. Actually, Marcus might be right about the championship. Lewis, without me feeding your strategies to Red Bull, Max Verstappen is going to have a much harder time beating you. David nodded as he approached. And now that you're driving without guilt and fear, you're going to be much faster and more confident. Carmen overheard the conversation. Are you boys talking about winning the championship? Lewis shook his head. Marcus thinks I can win the title now that our family is back together. Of course you can, Carmen said matter-of-factly. You're Lewis Hamilton. You've always been fast enough to win championships. The only thing stopping you was the weight you were carrying in your heart. Anthony Hamilton joined the group. What weight is that? The guilt about James's accident. David explained. But now Lewis knows the truth, that the accident was caused by mechanical failure, not driver error. Anthony looked confused. Wait, what? The accident wasn't Lewis's fault. Lewis realized they hadn't told Anthony about McLaren's cover-up yet. Dad, there's a lot we need to catch you up on. Over the next hour, Lewis and the others explained everything to Anthony. The mechanical failure, McLaren's cover-up, James's years of revenge, and the family's decision to keep the truth private. Anthony listened quietly, his expression growing angrier as he learned how his son had been betrayed. So McLaren let you carry the blame for 14 years to protect their own reputation? Anthony asked. Yes, but we've decided not to expose them, Lewis said. We're focusing on healing our family instead of punishing our enemies. Anthony thought. For a moment. Son, that's very mature of you. But I want you to know that I'm proud of how you handled this whole situation. What do you mean? You could have been bitter and angry when you learned the truth. You could have demanded revenge against McLaren. Instead, you chose to forgive and move forward. That takes real strength. Marcus beamed. That's why Lewis is going to win the championship. He's not carrying anger or guilt anymore. He's just carrying love for his family and passion for racing. James smiled. And he's going to have some unexpected help this season. What kind of help? Well, I spent 4 years learning every detail about Red Bull's strategies and weaknesses. Now I can use that knowledge to help Mercedes instead. Lewis looked surprised. James, you would do that? I owe you 4 years of fair competition, James replied. It's the least I can do to make up for the advantage I gave Red Bull. David clapped his hands together. So let me understand this correctly. Lewis is driving better than ever. He has his whole family supporting him, and he's about to get inside information about Red Bull strategies? That about sums it up, Carmen said with a smile. Marcus looked at Lewis with excitement. So do you think my wish might actually come true? Do you think you might win the championship with all of us there to celebrate? Lewis looked around at his family, the people who had loved him, lost him, found him again, and never given up on him. He thought about how free and confident he had felt during today's race. He thought about the rest of the season ahead, with no more secrets and no more guilt weighing him down. Marcus, Lewis said, I think your simple wish might have been the most powerful wish anyone has ever made. Why? Because it didn't just change one thing. It changed everything. It brought our family back together. It cleared my name about the accident. It gave James a chance to make amends. It helped David come home. And it made me remember why I love racing. Marcus grinned. So you think you can win the championship? Lewis picked up his Hungarian Grand Prix trophy and held it high. I think that if the rest of this season goes like today did, Max Verstappen and Red Bull are in for the biggest surprise of their lives. As the family laughed and celebrated together, Lewis realized that his brother's wish had already come true in the most important way. Their family was whole, their love was stronger than ever, and Lewis was finally free to be the driver and the person he was always meant to be. Whether he won the championship or not, he had already won something much more valuable, the knowledge that he was surrounded by people who believed in him, supported him, and would never give up on him. And that, Lewis thought, was worth more than any trophy in the world. 6 months later, Lewis Hamilton stood in the garage at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, putting on his helmet for the most important race of his life. If he finished in the top 3 today, he would win his 8th world championship. The garage was buzzing with activity. Mercedes engineers were making final checks on his car. His race engineer was reviewing strategy options. Reporters were trying to get last-minute interviews. But Lewis only had eyes for the group of people standing together near the pit wall. Marcus was there, now 17 and taller than Lewis. He wore a huge smile and a Mercedes team shirt with Hamilton family written on the back. David Stirling stood next to him, looking proud and nervous. James Stirling was there too, holding a laptop computer filled with Red Bull strategy analysis that he had shared with Mercedes. Carmen Hamilton was crying happy tears, just like she had at every race since the family reunion. Anthony Hamilton stood with his arm around her, both of them wearing matching Lewis Hamilton 8X Champion t-shirts that Marcus had ordered online. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked as Lewis approached the group. "I've been ready my whole life," Lewis replied. "But I needed my family here to make it happen." David put his hand on Lewis's shoulder. "Son, I want you to know something. Win or lose today, I'm proud of the man you've become." "Me too," James added. "Lewis, you've shown incredible grace and strength through everything we put you through. You deserve this championship more than anyone." Lewis looked at James. "Are you sure about the strategy information you gave us? You're not having second thoughts about helping us beat your old team?" James grinned. "Lewis, I spent 4 years helping Red Bull beat you. I figure I owe you at least one championship in return." Carmen wiped her eyes. "Lewis, your father and I just want you to drive safely and have fun out there. The championship is wonderful, but having our family together is the real prize." Anthony nodded. "We're proud of you no matter what happens in this race." Marcus stepped forward. "Lewis, remember what you told me 6 months ago when this all started?" "What's that?" "You said you weren't sure if you were a good driver anymore. You said you didn't know if you deserved to be champion." Lewis remembered that conversation from the night Marcus first called about David's letters. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Well," Marcus continued, "I hope today proves that you've always been good enough. The only thing that changed was that you stopped believing in yourself." Lewis hugged his little brother. "Marcus, your simple wish saved my career and my life." "Our family saved your career," Marcus corrected. "I just gave everyone permission to admit they loved you." The call came over the radio that drivers needed to get to their cars. Lewis's championship dream was about to become reality or remain just a dream. "One more thing," David said as Lewis started to walk away. "Lewis, race like the fearless kid I used to watch at the go-kart track. Race like you did before you learned to doubt yourself." Lewis climbed into his Mercedes and started the engine. Through his helmet radio, he could hear his race engineer giving him final instructions about tire strategy and fuel management. But Lewis was thinking about something else. He was thinking about a scared 16-year-old boy who had found some old letters in an attic and decided to heal his broken family. The race began under the bright lights of the Yas Marina circuit. Lewis started in second place behind Max Verstappen, exactly where he needed to be. For the first 20 laps, Lewis followed Max closely, studying his rival's driving style and waiting for the right moment to attack. Thanks to James Stirling's inside information, Mercedes knew exactly when Red Bull would make their pit stops and which tire strategies they planned to use. That on lap 25, Lewis made his move. He overtook Max on the outside of turn 6, a risky maneuver that he would have been too afraid to attempt 6 months earlier. The crowd cheered as Lewis took the lead. In the Mercedes garage, his family was jumping and screaming with excitement. "That's my brother," Marcus yelled, pumping his fist in the air. David and James high-fived each other. Carmen and Anthony were hugging and crying. Lewis held the lead for the next 40 laps, driving the race of his life. Every time Max tried to get close, Lewis defended perfectly. Every time Red Bull tried a strategic surprise, Mercedes was ready with the perfect countermove. With 10 laps remaining, Lewis's lead was 8 seconds. He was going to win the championship. "Lewis," his race engineer said over the radio, "you are about to become an 8-time world champion. How does it feel?" Lewis looked up at the grandstands, searching for his family in the crowd. He couldn't see them, but he knew they were there. "It feels like coming home," Lewis replied. 0.5 laps later, Lewis crossed the finish line in first place. The radio exploded with celebration from his team. "Lewis Hamilton, you are the 2025 Formula One World Champion," his race engineer screamed. Lewis pumped his fist as he drove his victory lap around the track. Fireworks exploded in the sky above. Abu Dhabi. The crowd was on its feet, cheering for one of the greatest drivers in Formula One history. But Lewis was thinking about his family. About Marcus, who had been brave enough to reach out to David Sterling. About David, who had found the courage to admit his mistakes. About James, who had chosen forgiveness over revenge. About his parents, who had never stopped believing in him. Lewis parked his car and climbed out, raising his arms to the sky. Immediately, he was surrounded by Mercedes team members celebrating the championship. But Lewis pushed through the crowd, looking for the 5 people who mattered most, and he found them at the edge of the track, all crying and laughing at the same time. Lewis ran to Marcus first, lifting his little brother off the ground in a huge hug. "You did it," Marcus screamed. "You won the championship." "My wish came true." "Our wish came true," Lewis corrected, setting Marcus down and hugging David. "I'm so proud of you, son," David whispered in Lewis's ear. Lewis hugged James next. "Thank you for helping me get here." "Thank you for forgiving me," James replied. Finally, Lewis hugged his parents, the people who had supported his racing dreams since he was 8 years old. "We love you, champion," Carmen said, tears streaming down her face. "We always knew you could do it," Anthony added. As the Hamilton family stood together on the track in Abu Dhabi, surrounded by thousands of cheering fans and hundreds of flashing cameras, Lewis realized that Marcus had been right all along. His brother's simple wish had been the most powerful force in the world. It had brought their family back together, cleared Lewis's name about the 2010 accident, and given him the confidence to win his 8th championship. But more importantly, it had reminded all of them that love is stronger than anger, forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, and family is more valuable than any trophy. The next morning, newspapers around the world carried the story of Lewis Hamilton's championship victory. But the headline that made Lewis smile the most was in a small English newspaper from Stevenage. "Local boy makes good. Marcus Hamilton's simple wish leads to brother's greatest victory." The article told the story of how a 16-year-old's desire to reunite his family had led to one of the most dramatic championship comebacks in Formula One history. Marcus was quoted in the article. "I just wanted my family to be happy again. I never imagined it would help Lewis win a championship. But I guess when families stick together, amazing things can happen." Lewis kept that newspaper clipping in his trophy case, right next to his 8th championship trophy. Because while the trophy represented his greatest professional achievement, the newspaper represented something even more important. The moment his little brother taught him that the simplest wishes, when made with love and courage, can change everything. 3 months later, at the annual Formula One Awards ceremony in London, Lewis was asked to give a speech about his championship season. That he stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of drivers, team principals, journalists, and racing officials. His whole family sat at a table near the front, all wearing formal clothes and proud smiles. "This championship belongs to my family," Lewis began. "6 months ago, my 16-year-old brother Marcus made what he called a simple wish. He wanted to meet someone from our past. That simple wish led to the most complicated and beautiful family reunion you can imagine." Lewis paused and looked directly at Marcus. "My brother taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is admit your mistakes. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is forgive people who have hurt you." The audience applauded, but Lewis wasn't finished. "Marcus showed me that family love is more powerful than any secret, any guilt, or any pain. He proved that when people care about each other enough, they can overcome anything." Lewis raised his championship trophy high above his head. This trophy represents speed, skill, and strategy. But it also represents the power of a simple wish made by a brave young man who refused to let his family stay broken. As the audience gave Lewis a standing ovation, Marcus wiped tears from his eyes. His simple wish had not only brought his family back together and helped his brother win a championship, it had also taught everyone in that room something important about love, forgiveness, and the courage to fight for the people who matter most. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. We share tales of hope, family, forgiveness, and the power of love to overcome any obstacle. And don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. In a world that often feels divided, stories like Marcus and Lewis's remind us that kindness, understanding, and the courage to reach out can change everything. Let's spread that message together. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.